get into the final topic that I'd like to cover in this podcast, which I'm going into a little bit of a different term. I'm still keeping on the media train, but it's not going to be about video games. I'm going to discuss video games because they're relevant to this, but it's not explicitly about them. The topic that I'd like to go over is adaptations. How do we do them right? Because I find them to be actually a particularly interesting form of media. So when I say an adaptation, I mean when someone takes a particular work and turns it into another type of work. So I think an obvious example is like when you take the Harry Potter books and turn them from a book series into a movie series, they'll be adapting the book into film. And then, one that I relate to is Detective Pikachu. It started as a Nintendo 3DS game, and then it became a movie. So what sorts of problems usually come about in adaptations? Because adaptations usually don't go super smoothly. I mean, they can, but they're not very, very easy to do. And the thing that I find is that it's very hard to maintain the same feel from the original piece. Now, like I said many times in the first episode and here alone, my favorite type of media is video games. I mean, the first three topics I discussed here had to do with video games, so most of the adaptations that I follow have to do with gaming. And in fact, I already brought one of them up, which is Detective Pikachu. Now, I have not played the game in whole. I've played the first chapter of the game because that's what's in the special demo. I own a copy of the game now. I just haven't had the opportunity to play it yet. However, I've also seen the movie twice. And actually, from what I've played in the game, the movie actually adapts the game pretty well, like shockingly well. For example, Detective Pikachu, the movie, hits a bunch of the beats from the game. For example, early into the film, the character, Detective Pikachu and Tim, that's the human character, they have to fend off some Apom, which is like, it's a monkey sort of Pokemon with a hand on its tail. And then in the movie, Tim and Pikachu get chased away from Tim's dad's apartment by the Apom. Now in the game, and this is not spoilers because it is the first chapter, which is the bit I have played, a group of Apoms steal a necklace, and Tim and Pikachu have to get it back. So the movie doesn't follow the game's plot exactly, which is good because those two types of plots are not the same kind of plot. You need that interactivity in a game as opposed to a movie where you're supposed to be kind of passive and watching it. But it hits enough beats to feel like they're the same story. Does that make sense? So it's not the exact same story, but the movie and the game each have enough similar beats to still feel like they're cut from the same cloth. They're still the same sort of quality piece. Now at the same time, so the game uses, when you're talking about the Pokemon itself, it uses like the standard anime-ish Pokemon art style. And then it uses I describe it as like a semi-anime art style for the human characters. I don't know, I look at things like, so the main character, again, is Tim. He has this pointy kind of, trying to think of a good character that has a similar nose, but he has this pointy triangular nose. I wanted to say George Jetson, but George Jetson, even though he has a long nose, has a round nose, so it's not a perfect comparison. I can't exactly describe the art style, but I don't know. For some reason, there's a lot of maps in the background, but it gives off, the game gives off a very English vibe to me, and I don't know. Maybe it's because the game's art reminds me of stuff like Professor Layton, but entirely in 3D. Whereas the movie, being an adaptation of the game, went for a different visual style, which, again, it still feels like it's the same piece, if only because of the story and the characters and a bunch of the elements that make it up, but it makes its own unique choices with it to make it its own entity. So, The movie, so the game goes for this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a pastel-y style. Again, it's very English. How I don't know. I'm sure someone listening to this probably has a significantly better description for it, but I can't come up with an adjective for it. Whereas the movie mimics like a bunch of bold colors, like everything kind of pops. Like to me, I look at the artwork for the DVD cover, and it mimics films like the 1990 Dick Tracy. That to me is a perfect example of what it's similar to. Whereas the movie also makes the Pokemon look like they could be real animals. I mean, the human characters are played by people, so of course they look real. So that's how it does its own thing, as opposed to, like, it could have gone totally animated and literally took the same like models and art from the game and brought it to life as a film, but that's much less exciting than making it a full real live action movie and going and doing its own separate thing, because then it's like you're just watching the game, and at that point you may as well just go watch a Let's Play. And that's not even going into some of the little liberties that the film takes, like Tim Goodman, the film's main character, is played by Justice Smith in the film, who is a young black actor, while in the game Tim is a white character. Now, I would like to make racial film representation a topic one day, but in Detective Pikachu, the fact that Tim's race doesn't match between both versions, it doesn't take the quality away from either or. So the film still works because Tim is black. The game still works because Tim is white. It's really not important, but it's very good to see that racial diversity in the film, especially because it is about one of the most popular video game franchises of all time, that people of every kind of background, people of both sexes, people of all races, they play the game. So it's great to see that diverse representation for its characters. So I would consider Detective Pikachu a good adaptation. I actually also quite enjoy it as a film. I know a bunch of people really didn't enjoy it very much, but I liked it at least. But how about a bad adaptation? Let's talk about the Garfield movie. Now that's funny. That's something I haven't talked about on this podcast yet, but it's the second episode, so great, I'm bringing it up now. I like comic strips. I don't read them religiously, if only because I don't get the newspaper, but if I did receive the newspaper, I would probably read the comic strips first. In fact, I used to buy a whole bunch of Garfield books. And back at home, I have a couple of huge stacks of them moved into my closet right now. But there's also a reason that I really haven't bought any in the last 6-ish years, and it's because Garfield really is not that interesting or funny after a while in comic strip form. Like, you can just kind of predict the punchline, like Garfield's watching TV, and the guy on TV says something. And then he says like another silly thing. And then there's a third thing that comes from the TV, and Garfield has a witty comment. That's the plot of like hundreds of comic strips. You can just kind of predict them. They get really dry and boring after a while. But I suppose it would be good for me to go into some of my background with Garfield. Hold on. Quick drink break. I'm sorry, my voice is getting... My throat is getting really dry here. I need it. Oh, okay, thank you. So I first saw Garfield through Garfield and Friends, which is like the 1980s cartoon on Boomerang. And I was like 7 at the time when I saw it. And I think the show actually adapts Garfield pretty well. It still takes its own direction. You're stretching what is otherwise like a 3 to 6 panel comic strip into a 7-minute cartoon, so it kind of has to do its own thing. But it still keeps like just the funny, quirky tone about it. Because you still have things like Garfield never moves. I mean, he moves his mouth in like emotions, but he never talks. You always hear him thinking. Like John is still a huge dork, and he gets into these weird, funny outfits with like polka dot bow ties. So it keeps enough familiar elements to still feel like it's the comic strip, but in cartoon form. For 7 minutes, 14 minutes every week. Whereas the movie is an 80-minute, one long story. Now, in short, the film retells the story of like how John is this guy who has Garfield, not a cartoonist. I don't remember if they make a point of him being a cartoonist or not, but obviously the show makes a point of it, like I said. But there's this guy John, and he has a cat named Garfield, and he's in love with this Dr. Liz Wilson, who's Garfield's vet. And somehow, through visiting Liz, John inherits a dog named Odie, which is not how it happened in the comic strip, but that is my own nerdy aside that I will leave for another time, that you probably won't hear on here. Then I'll just talk about it on my own with friends or something. Anyway, so then in the movie, John takes like Odie to a dog show, and one of the people who's judging the dog show is like a TV personality, and he's so impressed that he tries to get Odie on TV. And then the TV guy tries whisking Odie away to New York with him to make money off of him, and then John and Garfield aren't going to see him ever again, so now Garfield goes on an adventure to get Odie back. Note, this has little to nothing to do with lasagna, coffee, or Garfield standard quips. Now, that's not to say that the movie doesn't have any of those things in it, but it's not in the same way as in the comics, or again, in the TV show. So in a Garfield comic, like I said, he usually comments about something mundane in a very sarcastic way. Like I brought up the TV, for example. So one, like a particular comic strip that I looked up from May 14th, 2001. He's flipping between TV channels with his remote, and the first channel he sees shows nonsense, and then the second one he sees shows dribble. But then in the third panel, Garfield goes, "At last!" when he finds nonsensical dribble. Like I said, that's a real strip from May 14th, 2001. So it's really hard to take something that's that little teeny tiny bite-sized story that has a bunch of other little teeny tiny bite-sized non-connecting stories and turn it into a feature-length film. So it's really not surprising that the adaptation didn't work super well. I mean, it still worked fine. It's not like it's a terrible, horrible 1-star movie, but it's definitely not, an 8, 9 out of 10 movie either. And that's not even going into like a bunch of the little things that are just like flat out wrong in the movie. So in the comics and in the TV show, for example, there's the character Nermal, who's a gray kitten who's the world's cutest kitty cat in the comics, and he annoys Garfield. Garfield thinks he's like terrible because he's so cute, and that's objectively not what Garfield is. But then in the film, Nermal is a white, fully grown cat who's Garfield's friend, which again is distinctly not what Nermal is. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen the movie in full in a long time, probably multiple years. I have seen it in full at least once, but like with a bunch of other movies that I've seen, I've mostly just seen short clips here and there. Like I said, that's just how I am with most movies. So I might not remember the film super well, but suffice it to say, Garfield the movie, whether it was, or rather just Garfield the property, whether it's in comic strip form, 30-minute TV special, or 20-minute TV show, it really wasn't about things like, what's one thing that happened? Oh, there's like a plot point about Garfield has to change the route that trains go on to make sure that the guy can't take Odie away. I'm sorry, I'm spoiling a big part of the film, but that's not what Garfield is about, I don't know. It's strange. It's not to say that Garfield could not ever in any way work as a full-length film, but it really has, there's a certain essence that it has to keep. And like I said, with Detective Pikachu as an adaptation, it does its own thing, but it keeps enough beats from the original piece to make it still feel like it's from that, like it's cut from that cloth. Actually, it's funny. I think when looking at comic strip movies, a great comparison, one that adapts very well, in my opinion, is the Peanuts movie. And in that, they're like, instead of making one giant interconnected story, the film actually goes for 3 shorter vignettes. And I feel like that's something that the Garfield film could have done in comparison, because then it still hits a bunch of the beats that you would expect from Garfield. And then it doesn't have to commit to trying to tell one gigantic story. So yeah, I'm just curious then, audience. What are some adaptations that you think are strong? What are some that you think are weak? And all the ones that I talked about here just happen to be something becoming a movie, but it could be going in a different direction. It could be turning something into a book, something into a game, or just something else entirely. All right, well, that covers up the last topic, so I guess it's just time to wrap things up here then. So, let's see, I just have a little bit more of notes here.